Hey, this is Jack Tyler from the Boston Sax Shop, and in this video we're going to be going over how to use the Voyager saxophone multi-tool. I developed this tool thinking about all of the times that I've gotten those anxious phone calls or texts from saxophone players who are on the other half of the world, on tour, or in the middle of a recording session, and all of a sudden everything goes wrong. A horn that was playing great a day or a couple hours or a couple minutes ago all of a sudden is not functioning, and trying to make those relatively simple adjustments usually to fix the problem can be unbelievably frustrating and sometimes absolutely impossible because the right tools are not at hand. Let's go ahead and jump in and see what we can do with the Voyager. So first and foremost, we have 3 precision screwdriver blades that are on the multi-tool that are going to allow you to make precise adjustments to the different areas of the horn. I'm talking to you out there if you've got a bunch of like random eyeglass screwdrivers kicking around in your case. That's not going to cut it. It's really important to have the correct size blade when you're working on any part of the horn, because without it, not only can you easily slip out of the screw slots and do damage to the horn, but you can damage the screws themselves. So it's important to know what to use where. So up front we have a 4mm screwdriver blade. This is going to be great for pivot screws and adjustment screws. A 3mm blade, this is going to be for your stack keys like the left hand stack, the right hand stack, and depending on your horn, for the low E flat and C keys and the side of sharp. And then we have our 2mm blade, which is going to be perfect for the octave key on the neck, the palm keys, and the smaller rods on the side C and side B flat. So first off, one of the most common issues with a saxophone that all of a sudden was playing great and all of a sudden is not, is that the low notes just become stuffy and muddy and resistant. Typically, the problem here is that the G-sharp adjustment screw has gone out of regulation. If we look at the G-sharp on most saxophones, it's being articulated by the low notes, low B, C sharp, and B flat, meaning when you play those notes, it's actively lifting up that G-sharp key. The only thing that is keeping the G-sharp closed, and therefore keeping a massive leak in the middle of the horn happening, is the adjustment screw that sits above it that is typically attached to the F-sharp key in the right hand. This material underneath can easily get compressed due to changes in humidity, to your saliva getting on it. There are a myriad of different ways that this thing can go wrong. But if it compresses and the G-sharp is venting when you play those lower notes, the entire horn is going to play really, really poorly on the lower end. So if you find yourself in a situation where all of a sudden the low notes become very difficult to get out, we're going to first start by doing what I like to call the low C test. So this test involves playing a low C, and once you play the note and you've articulated it, you take your left pinky and you articulate the G-sharp touch piece. When you do this, after you've hit the note, if you hear the note start to crack or break up or just, go away entirely, this is a really good indication that the G-sharp is venting. So to make the adjustment to fix this issue, you're first going to locate the G-sharp adjustment screw. Then you're going to take the largest blade, the 4mm blade on your Voyager, insert it into the screw head and turn about 1/8 to 1/4 turn, and then repeat the low C test until you can play that note, open the G-sharp key, and not feel anything change. This should inherently fix the problem with the lower notes after that. Now, if you happen to go too far, you're going to know right away, because the right hand is going to become incredibly hard to play, because you'll actually be holding open the F-sharp key if you screw down too far. It's very easy to fix this. Just go back the other direction until you find the balance, again using the low C test as your reference. There are also a few other adjustments that can be made in a similar fashion. One is the Bis Bb flat adjustment screw, which is located right next to the G-sharp. So the Bis key, of course, is a way to be able to play a B flat using either 1-in-1, 2-in-1, or 3-in-1 in terms of our fingerings of the right hand, and is adjusted in a very similar way again to the G-sharp. You have an adjustment screw that can be turned clockwise to create more pressure on the armature connected to the Bis Bb flat key in order to create a seal. So again, if you're having problems with your Bis speaking, if you're using a 1-in-1 fingering, this is an easy adjustment that can be made using the 4mm screwdriver blade on your Voyager. Now, on many modern saxophones, there is also a very similar adjustment screw connecting the low B and the low C sharp key. Now, on this vintage saxophone, I don't have one, unfortunately, but what this does is allows for pressure from the low B key to keep the low C sharp key sealed when you roll your pinky from B to B flat, so that there's no venting if you happen to accidentally bump the low C sharp when you're playing between those two notes. So to test to see if this regulation is intact and in fact working, simply play a low B and then move your pinky in a position where you're pressing down the C sharp as well. If that B immediately cracks and disappears, you'll know that you need to tighten up that regulation. And again, moving about 1/4 turn, even 1/8 of a turn at a time clockwise to add more pressure to that adjustment screw down on the low C sharp armature will allow you to make that regulation concisely. Another really common problem that can happen is a rod or even pivot screw backing out of its inherent resting position due to sympathetic vibration. This is especially true with vintage horns. I think you all know what I'm talking about. Everything is playing great, all of a sudden it's not, and you happen to notice that one of the rods or screws in your saxophone is sticking about a ½ inch out of the horn. When this happens, it can throw off the alignment of the keys. And again, not having the proper screwdriver at hand is going to make it very difficult, trying to use your thumbnail or something like that to reinsert and tighten that rod to prevent it from happening again. So if you find yourself in that situation where there's that pesky rod that continually backs out, you can use your Voyager multi-tool using, again, the 4mm blade for pivot screws, 3mm for your hinge rods, and the 2mm for the smaller hinge rods like the palm keys and the side keys to be able to accurately tighten the horn back up. There is nothing more disheartening than opening up your case, starting to play, and realizing that one of the keys in the stacks is moving incredibly sluggishly, not even coming back up to its original position sometimes. The root cause of this is usually one of two things. Either there is oxidation that is forming between the steel hinge rod and the brass hinge tube that is causing a rub or a bind, or there's been a little bit of a bump that may have damaged the rod and made it untrue, which again is rubbing against the inside of the hollow hinge tubes of your saxophone keys. Though it doesn't work every single time, more likely than not, if you actually back out the rod a quarter turn at a time, testing for a key that is binding, you can find that sweet spot which will allow the key to move again. Either you'll be breaking up the rust just enough to get the key working, or you'll find the correct orientation of the rod in order to allow the key to move freely again. Now, again, this is not a final solution for a problem like this. It's a mechanical situation that either needs to be addressed by creating a new rod, straightening a rod, or removing that rust, and you should schedule an appointment with a local technician at your earliest convenience. The springs on your saxophone are what controls the action of your keys, and are usually not something you have to concern yourself with as a saxophone player until one of them happens to get caught on your clothing or in the case and pops out of its cradle. This can be so annoying to try to get these things back in if you don't have the proper tool, which of course is included on the Voyager. This is a spring hook, and what this will allow you to do is easily manipulate the springs, both putting them in and out of the cradle. Whenever we're doing anything with a spring, we always want to make sure to put the tool in the correct position. If you look at the spring on a saxophone, it has a pointed tip which goes to a straight shank. The correct placement of the tool on the spring to ensure that we're not going to have any surprises is right below where the angle of the tip meets the shank. Putting the spring hook either at the very end of the spring or towards where it's actually installed in the post could run the risk of breaking it, and we never want to be in that situation. In fact, I would strongly recommend, if you can, if you're adjusting the springs on your saxophone, to be wearing some kind of eye protection just in case something goes wrong. As a secondary safety note, if you notice that there is a lot of rust that has built up on your spring, or it looks like it's about to break, don't mess with it, even if it's the only thing keeping your horn from playing. Now, there are going to be some occasions where you might actually need to remove a key from the saxophone, either to clean it, to have a closer inspection with what's actually going on, or to access other parts of the instrument. The first step before you remove any key from the saxophone is to disengage the spring. You don't want the key to come flying off as soon as you undo either its pivot screws or hinge rod. Now, if you're taking off a key that has pivot screws, it's pretty simple. Again, disengage the spring, then back out one of the pivot screws until it comes out. You should be able to remove it with your hand and then carefully remove the key in order to access another one, or again, have a closer inspection of that key or pad. Now, in the instance of a hinge rod, like something in the left-hand stack or one of our side keys, you want to back that screw out after you've disengaged any springs involved until you hear a click. Once you hear that click, that means that the threads have passed through the post at the very end of the stack and it's safe to start pulling on it. If you can't get the rod out with your hands, it's probably a sign that it needs to go to a technician because there could be rust involved. And if you need to use a pair of pliers to remove the rod, make sure you're always holding those pliers perpendicular to the screw slot as not to close it down, and also using pliers that have either a flat or round jaw with absolutely no serration or sharp edges so that you don't end up damaging the rod. Now, in addition to being able to put a spring back in its cradle on the saxophone, you can also, if you're feeling a little bit more advanced, adjust the action on your horn using the spring hook on the Voyager. Whenever we're adjusting the action on a spring, the first thing that you're going to do is remove it from the cradle and note its natural inclination, both in terms of its angle and curvature. In order to increase the tension on a spring, if you want to add stiffer action or try to add strength to a key that might be blowing open, you want to pull that spring or push that spring in the direction it's already headed, and then carefully put it back into place in its cradle. And anytime you're reinstalling a spring, you never want to go any further than you have to in order to get it in position so you don't change the action. If you want to do the opposite and lighten the action of a spring, you want to again either pull or push it in the opposite direction that it is naturally moving once it's out of the cradle. This will give the action a lighter feel. Last but certainly not least, we have a reed leveling tool. Whenever you're traveling, you're dealing with different climates, different humidities, and this can wreak absolute havoc on your reed's performance and longevity. One of the most common issues that happens with reeds is that they warp. And I'm not just talking about the tip of the reed warping, which I'm sure all of you are very familiar with, but actually the table of the reed warping. This is the thickest part of the reed blank, and as a result, it's going to absorb the most amount of moisture as it's being used. Over time, typically there will form a bump in this area that can actually push it off the table of your mouthpiece, creating a reed that plays really stuffy and inconsistent. Using our reed leveling tool, we can very easily correct this problem by quickly making a few passes moving away from you using the flat part so that it resurfaces the reed. Doing this every so often, even if you don't think there's a problem, is going to definitely increase the life of your reeds and, more importantly, their performance and response. I hope you've enjoyed this video overview of the Voyager multi-tool. Should you have any questions or concerns, feel free, of course, to contact us at bostonsaxshop.com.